Hi, I'm Scott Apel, your host for this, the final episode of The Prisoner. Tonight we finally get some answers to the multitude of questions the series has raised over the previous 16 weeks, although they may not be exactly the answers you've been expecting. During the course of the series, we've received a great number of letters from viewers sharing their comments and opinions about The Prisoner, and after tonight's episode, I'll be joined by some of our more knowledgeable correspondents in a special half-hour discussion, so be sure to stay with us. But for now, let's see everyone at attention and fall out. On Sunday, February the 4th, 1968, several million viewers in the United Kingdom tuned in to watch this grand finale of Patrick McGoohan's mystifying television series. What they eagerly expected to see was a final narrative solution to wrap the series up and provide some answers to its puzzling storyline. Well, as we've just witnessed, what they actually saw was something else entirely. Angered fans looking for some kind of James Bond swamped the ITC switchboard with calls and literally stormed the offices in protest the following day. McGoohan wisely left for a vacation in Ireland until the heat was off. As a finale to the series, this episode provided less answers than it did allegory, symbology, and striking imagery, a fitting capstone to an allegorical, symbolic, and visually stunning series. With us here tonight to discuss some of these elements and perhaps shed some light on some of the unanswered questions are four dedicated prisoner files. To my left is Jed Hartman of Palo Alto and Jennifer Habersat of Campbell. To my immediate right, Susan Corbell of Novato. And to my far right is Margaret Torrey of Cupertino. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy yourselves. Well, I think we ought to kick this off with a question that I've been wondering about. We started out with an experiment this time around. We showed the episodes in a different order. We tried to put them in an order that would show a psychological progression of the prisoner from victim to victor. Do you have any comments on whether it worked or not, or do you think the experiment was a success or a failure?
Well, it was not only a success, in the sense that you're talking about, is psychological development, but the storyline itself flowed a lot better. There were, before there were discordant notes that would distract you from the storyline, things that didn't make sense, that now it runs much more smoothly.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it made a lot more sense this way with the new order.
Good. It looked good on paper, but we we had to try it out for ourselves. It was an experiment for us just as much as for all the rest of the viewers to see if it came out all right. Okay. Anybody else? Any comments on that?
Well, just that a lot of things that you may not have noticed as being relevant or important in the old order suddenly made sense or clicked into place in the new order. They, like she said, that made it flow a lot smoother. The whole viewing of the show.
Okay, well, now that we've been patted on the back properly, we should move on. I think the first topic that we wanted to discuss was the village as a microcosm of the world. Is this, in fact, how you individuals see this, and why? Jed, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't be. I mean, it perfectly, it's a mirror of the society as McGoohan saw it or was trying to parody it. And as such, it has to reflect the whole society.
Okay. Jennifer, I think you brought up some points while we were discussing this earlier.
I think in some ways it can't be anything else. Any place you go, you're going to find a village. People get together, unless you want to be a hermit. People are gregarious, they're going to group together, and somebody's going to rise to a position of power.
There always be that power structure.
How that person handles that power makes it a village or not.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, I think the fact that it seems to be such a generic society just highlights the similarities to our own society.
Yeah, just the fact that there are hermits proves that there are villages. They've got to be a hermit for something.
Well, do you feel that the village is, do you feel that the world as we know it is becoming more and more village-like in the 20 years or so since the series has been produced? Have we actually grown more village-like? Is that why the series stays as relevant as it does?
Well, 20 years ago when it first showed, we could look at this village and say, oh, this looks sort of like the Soviet Union or those Eastern Bloc countries. These days, We don't say that anymore. We say, this looks awfully familiar. So this looks like here and now. Maybe we need to watch this person and see how he reacts in this village so we know how to keep our own individuality. Maybe in another 20 years, the Soviets will be watching this and saying, oh, look, it's America. I bet they can't watch this over there.
Very good. Very good. Well, if this is a microcosm of the world, if the village is, in some sense, supposed to stand for the world as we know it, in what ways do we fit into this? In what ways is our world becoming more and more a village?
Besides the obvious television and that type of thing.
No, let's go for the obvious. You got plenty of time.
No, I think that society itself is proof of it. People, every day you have to fight against the computer sending you a bill that you didn't, run up, or they want to know what your social security number is, what's your driver's license number, so I can write it on the back of your check, and what check number did you use when you wrote this, and how much was it, exact amount, numbers, down to the penny. Numbers are very important in today's society. They've always been important, but more so in the last 20, 30 years, every day, and it's growing more dramatic, I think.
Especially as a means of identification.
All right. Well, let's move. Anyone else have another comment on that subject? Should we move on? Okay. Move on. Well, we were discussing before the show the idea that was Magoo actually an everyman character, or was he a mythic hero? And how could he be both at the same time? I believe Margaret was the one who brought this idea up.
Well, he has all these tremendous capabilities and abilities. He's an Olympic boxer and he's an Olympic fencer, and it's hard to reconcile when you're looking at someone like that. It's hard to reconcile yourself in his position. How would you? If in his position, I would not react the way he does. But I think that his qualities are exaggerated to make a point. And he becomes a mythic hero because he's in a situation that's very extreme, almost to the point of absurdity.
I think when we were talking about this before, what my point was that his situation is exaggerated, so his talents have to be exaggerated too. He can probably be both an everyman and a mythic hero at the same time, since we're sort of viewing him through a telescope. Almost everything is exaggerated. The village is an exaggerated version of the world. His skills are our little skills exaggerated. His problems are our small problems exaggerated too.
Right.
So,
true.
All right. Who else was going to talk about this? Jennifer, you had something to say, didn't you? Maybe not. I could be wrong.
Go ahead, launch into it. Okay, we look at number 6 in this village and we say, well, this is never going to happen to us. And it goes back to what you were saying about this being an exaggeration. Well, also, we are in sort of the same position in the village that he is our government's not going to kill us just for living or for thinking differently. We actually have to do something to really bring attention to ourselves before the government is going to notice us. In this case, he is put into a situation where if any one of us were put into it, we might think, oh, well, I'm just an ordinary person. I'm not anybody special. How can I, possibly fight these people? He didn't know either. He was put into a situation he had to emerge as a hero. He wasn't a hero when he went in.
Yeah, that brings us back to the mythic hero again, where he starts out as a common everyman person and was put through these trials and comes out.
He is every man until he is put into an extraordinary situation in which he emerges as an extraordinary person.
But the character has extraordinary abilities even before he finds himself in the village. He's one of the top spies in the British government. So how can he then be an everyman character?
We have extraordinary abilities, each one of us. But we haven't been put to the test, so how do we know what they are?
I was thinking about, I think it was Nietzsche who said, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Right? This is a perfect example of that. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to make the comment that I think the most important thing about him is that he knows his limitations. Like we were talking earlier, he chose the sea route, and Many Happy Returns over going through the mountains. He looked at the mountains, went, turned around and went and built a raft instead. So I think the fact that he knows what his limitations are what make him stronger in his other areas. He knows, well, I can do this, I'll do it right, or I won't do it at all. And that's important to his character.
And he does have character flaws, too, that we've noticed, weaknesses. The damsel in distress syndrome always seems to get to him, and he's always betrayed by it, and yet he keeps going back to that, I must help this damsel in distress. Does he have any other weaknesses that you can point out?
Well, who doesn't?
Do you think his individuality is a weakness in this situation?
I don't know if it can be a hindrance as well as an advantage to any person. You know, being an individual can be great. You know, you do your thing and go out and conquer the world in your own way. And at the same time, you have to admit that if you're an individual in a working atmosphere or even among friends, there are certain things that, you know, people look at you and go, gee, this person puts strange things on their walls. You know, what do they do in the middle of the night with these strange things on their walls? Everybody has, you know, something different to do in individuality, and I think it'd be a crime to say that it's wrong or that it's right. You know, advantages and disadvantages.
Okay.
But in the same way that his strengths were maybe strengthened by being in the village, by being in such an extraordinary situation, maybe his individuality was strengthened by their insistence that he was not an individual.
Again, the trial by fire type of thing. Okay. Well, now in this last episode, we saw a number of just extraordinary items. The revelation, for instance, that number 6 is indeed number 1 and his own worst enemy. What bothers me about this final episode is the ambiguous ending. Now, it's meant to bother us, obviously, and it's meant to be ambiguous, so that we are never sure whether in the final shot he is actually a free man in London or if he is still, as it says on the screen, a prisoner. Is this, to you, an optimistic or a pessimistic ending?
I think it's primarily optimistic. He's chosen the prison of London. He's choosing his own bars and what color they'll be and how far apart they'll be.
Do you think he'll become more complacent now that he's chosen the prison of his own?
To a certain degree, yes. You can't stay on a high all your life. You got to come down sometime. It's too difficult to maintain that kind of feeling.
Okay. Anything else? Margaret?
Well, and I think it's also a realistic view. I think we're all prisoners of society and in a society, and it's important to make the choice of what our prison is going to be. But that's not, you know, a depressing thought, really. I mean, we get a lot of benefits from civilization and society, and that we build our own prison walls.
So the message is that you can escape one prison, but you'll always be entrapped by a larger prison somewhere.
Right.
Perhaps.
Call yourself.
Very good.
Or even by another prison in another context. There's no guarantee that he wouldn't be picked up by another version of the village group that captured him in the first place.
The other side.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Okay. Well, the whole ambiguous ending. This seems to indicate that there may be something going on next. There may be another cycle starting in the man's life. It ends exactly as it begins. What would that be? Is he going to go back and be an antisocial individual in London and fight for his individuality there as strongly, as blatantly, as violently as he did in the village, or is it a more subtle type of transition?
I think we were seeing one cycle end at the beginning of the episode. He was leaving a prison at the beginning. He gave in his resignation and he said, "That's it. You're not going to tell me what to do anymore. I'm going to go off and do what I want." And instead, somebody else stepped in and said, "No, you're going to do what we want now." And he still said no. So at the end of this, it's just right that he'll go on to face something else. I think it's in man to try and conquer either what he doesn't like or to overcome obstacles. And there will always be a prison of sorts. as soon as you escape one, you'll just find yourself going into the next thing that you have to conquer and move on and become a better person for it, hopefully, when you get through.
Well, there's another point then. Does the individuality always have to equate with antisocial behavior, as in most of the episodes we've seen? I mean, in that context, it was good that he was antisocial. He was fighting a sick society, but if this society is a microcosm of our world, does that mean we should be antisocial to be individuals too, or is there some more constructive way to handle this?
Well, I don't think you have to be antisocial to be an individual. Just the fact that we're sitting here all together being individuals and talking about our own ideals, I think is one very large good point in the favor of individuality, because we each have our own ideals and we can share those with one another. Whether we agree with them or not, they might help to form new ideas that we have later on that make us the individuals that we are. So you can't truly be an individual without a little bit of intermixing with society itself. Be able to form a good value judgment on why you're an individual or why you like or dislike something.
Okay.
There are shades of individuality too, because you, as by being here, we're part of a group automatically. So we can still be individuals and yet be part of a group. So maybe he doesn't have to be an absolute individual to do things his own way.
Very good. Okay. Well, one of the other things that we saw in this episode was that in order to escape from the village, the prisoner and his cohorts had to resort to massive physical violence. They shot their way out with machine guns. They fired off the missile. Is this violence meant to be... It seems as if it's meant to be a lesson to us in some way. But is it a lesson in that violence is the only way out of a situation like this? Or is it a lesson to tell us that this is what usually goes on and we can't afford to do this anymore?
Well, besides the fact that the obvious having to do with the series itself, I think it's important to note that, Patrick Magoo himself didn't really use a gun in the Secret Agent Man series that he did. He didn't use a gun during The Prisoner. And all of a sudden, in the last episode, here he is, blowing everybody away. And I think it's sort of a summation, saying, here, we're going to end all of this right now. Let's get it over with. And it is a look at society itself, and that we've always used violence to try and answer problems that we have. Not that it's necessarily right.
Is it even necessary, would be the question.
It's never necessary, but that's the way it is. You get a mass of people moving, and you can't have an intellectual debate about, well, do you want to be president or shall I? It's more or less, let's kill these people who are suppressing us. That's it. We'll get rid of them. We'll worry about everything else later. So you get this mob mentality, which is basically what they had at the end of the show.
Mm-hmm. It's the easiest way to get your opponents out of the way.
Okay. But is it necessary? Is the message of this episode that this violence is necessary for social change? Or is it only supposed to act as a mirror that, hey kids, this is how it usually happens?
I think it's implying that he didn't actually have to go as far as he actually did. Even going so far as to launch the rocket containing number 1, supposedly.
You had an interesting theory about what else that rocket contained, too.
Well, yes, there was no real proof that it actually had number 1 in it. It could well have had anything, including a nuclear warhead, for example. When he launched it, he had no idea where it was going to go or where it would come down. And he could have been endangering huge numbers of people, if not the whole world.
As well as endangering the lives of the people in the village.
Right.
Good point. That's why they called it Fallout.
But that's typical of any kind of revolution.
The violence just escalates.
Well, it escalates. In Russia, the Bolsheviks took over the government. They had no idea who they were going to put as leader of this new regime, but they killed they killed out the Tsar and his family. They took over, and the next thing you know, they've got something. I'm sure this is not what Marx had in his mind, what we've got now in Russia. So it's typical that violence would end up with sort of an iffy question about the future.
That seems typical of almost any act of violence, in that it's an irrational act without, thinking about the consequences of it. whether it's on a personal scale or a global scale. And that may be what he's trying to tell us in this last episode, is not that necessarily violence is necessary for social change, but at this point it's fatal.
Well, and I think it's fatal because eventually, by a violent act, you set off a chain of events, and you set something in motion that you may not be able to control. You may think you're only, you make a rational choice to do something violent, and that's the end of it. But you have no control over the events that are going to follow. And we now do have nuclear warheads that can blow us all up and blow up the Earth.
11, 12 times over?
Yeah,
like yeah. A little bit scary.
Stacked up.
Any final words on that subject? The violence in the show?
Well, relating it back to what you were saying about escaping to London being a larger prison, maybe he's escaped into a larger prison which itself is only going to be destroyed if it is indeed true that he's launched a bomb of some kind.
Okay. Well, let's hope not. It's been 20 years. So.
I would like to add, it was emotionally gratifying to see him come out in that macho stance and blow them away. He's been talking for 17 weeks, for a year, and finally got rid of them. And I felt it was a dramatic device. It was great, and it was pretty clean. It's about the cleanest violence I've seen in a long time. There wasn't any blood and guts and no writhing and agony.
There was other violence, though, earlier in the series. Not that he didn't necessarily use a gun, but there were times when he would beat up his opponents.
Yeah, he was doing that all the time.
There's even a line in one of the early episodes, A, B, and C, I think it is. He says, "Violence will do you no good." And he says, "It relieves the feelings." It does have some effect there. Oh, okay, well, let's move on to another topic. I know we were talking earlier about the poor light that women were shown in this series. Almost every woman who came across in The Prisoner betrayed him, was found out to be eventually no good at all. The people who escape at the end, all men. There's not a single positive woman's role in this series. And I know that all of you had comments to make about this. Margaret, you want to?
Well, I think that the various roles of women that were in this series were stereotypes. In The Girl Who Was Death, he was spoofing, the sexual siren. There was Mrs. Butterworth, who produced the birthday cake. There was the doctor who tucked him in and made him his cup of tea and learned how to make a proper cup of tea in the process. But they all seem to be caricatures. Not very attractive people at all, which is too bad. And I hope that's a product of the time in which it was produced.
Let's hope
I think
so.
he feels
the fact that we can come and talk about it indicates we got a little bit more awareness about that subject anyway. I liked you bringing up The Girl Who Was Death, too, as a spoof of that type of betraying woman character. Because it seemed like at that point, the prisoner was able to recognize that character in his own life outside in the village and in his own psychology, and not only recognize it, but make fun of it, integrate it into his own psychology enough to accept it and spoof it and say, well, yes, I know this is the way it goes, but that's the way I am. Susan, you had some comments, did you?
Well, I was just thinking of even the fact that when he portrays mankind's darker sides, it's always represented by the woman. The number 2 in Dance of the Dead and all of her staff, each one represented a different dark side, and they were all women. And I think it would have been very nice to see a show like this that was so far ahead of its time, that represented society and what the individual or people go through trying to become individuals. It would have been nice to see women represented in a better light in that situation. Maybe let one of them represent a good side. Even the women are used in it. The woman that was made to believe that she was in love with him and he was in love with her, she didn't have any say in that matter either. So whether they were in on it or not, almost every woman in the show that I can think of betrayed him in one way or another. And it doesn't have to be that way. Women don't always betray everybody, believe me.
Comes from an expert. Having been a woman all her life, she can make a kind of statement like that. Any other statements?
Well, I think it's a little bit difficult to say that these women were all bad because we're looking at this from number 6's point of view. Number 2 in Dance of the Dead was an excellent number 2.
Oh, she was.
She knew what she was doing. She was the only one who wasn't a little bit afraid of him. She was in total control during the whole thing. Allison, she was doing her job. Okay, she betrayed him because she thought she was supposed to. She thought she had good reason for this.
That's in Schizoid Man.
Okay, yeah. I don't think we can just blanketly say that these women are all betraying him. Some of them, if we look at it from the village's point of view, they're doing their job, and they're doing a good job.
And in particular, the number 2 in Dance of the Dead could hardly be said to be betraying him because she didn't pretend to be on his side. So if she was simply saying, I'm trying to break you and that's what my job is, then she was being loyal to her causes.
Okay, I think the point here was not that every woman in the series betrays him, but that there are no positive role models for women in this show. That for one reason or another, every woman in this show has, some kind of objectionable action towards the man, and that is very odd. It's whether it's a function of Magoo's own psychology or the scriptwriter's mentality or the times is something that we probably will never know. But it's interesting to point out that wait a minute, there's 17 hours worth of television and there's not one positive woman model in here.
I think I just thought of one.
Oh no, there goes our theory.
But she was only there for about 2 minutes before she jumped out the window and hammered into Anvil.
That's Ryan's old friend. Yeah. She became a damsel in distress then. Preyed on his
weakness. And the woman in A, B, and C, the Countess or whoever she was. She was on his side.
Madame Engadine?
Yeah.
The one who ran the party? Yeah, but she was a dream figure too. Part of his
the whole thing can be a dream.
I don't think we have time to discuss whether it's dream or reality. I think we did that already once. So laid that question to rest for all time. I guess probably the final subject that we ought to talk about is the series itself as a statement about television on television. I know Margaret wanted to bring this up, so I'm going to.
Yeah, I think that The Prisoner is a work of art on television, and you can analyze it as you would analyze a work of art. But the ironic twist in this series is that they've made a comment about television. Television, we turn the television screens on, the images flash before us, information is disseminated, we're entertained. We never say no to the television. We watch it and we absorb. And on this program, things do not appear to be are not as they appear to be. You're constantly brought up and you're constantly questioning television and what it is showing you. And is it the only source of information?
They use a lot of television within the series too, surveillance cameras, constant surveillance on the people.
And in Dance of the Dead, he holds the pillow up to the blank screen and starts spitting and snarling at it, because it wants to see, it wants to look in.
I hear the cable companies are working with something like that now. Plus, there's that nice revelation in Girl Who Was Deaf too, where we get that one moment where we realize that he has total control of the village's technology by turning on the cameras in number 2's so that number 2 can see him on his screen without number 2 doing anything. He looks so shocked that, my God, how did he do that? So I think it's a wonderful way to sneak in a comment about television by doing a show with these subtle messages in it. So anyone else? No? Okay, well, let's see. Let's try to sum this up. We've only got a few minutes left. What can we say about The Prisoner? Is there any last comments that you'd like to make about the show or your relation to it? Jed, we'll start with you.
Well, I think it's an incredibly good show. Definitely, like you said, a work of art. And it's still perfectly relevant, if not more relevant than it was 20 years ago. With all the, with 1984 past, it's just a little bit late, but still, there are more and more of the things that we see in the series, including the control through television, and hopefully not the stereotypes of women. But, it seems like it's going to continue to be worthwhile watching it.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Well, as far as the women are concerned, we have to remember that when this show was being made, Gloria Steinem was a Playboy bunny, okay?
She was on an undercover assignment. She never meant it.
It doesn't matter. I think that we're being challenged to question the way we're living our lives through this show. I think we can't watch it and we can, but we're being challenged to say, well, what about your own life? How many things do you go along with? And just say, that's okay, that's okay. So I think it's asking us to question our own lives, to examine our own lives.
It's making us think?
No. It's asking us if we'd like to think.
Very good. Very good.
Touché.
Susan?
I agree with everything that's been said so far, obviously. I think it's good in that it is making us ask the questions, or asking us to ask the questions. And I think they're questions that need to be asked. Are you doing what you want to be doing now? Or are you doing what other people want you to be doing? Are you ready to move ahead and do something about the situation that you find yourself in? And I think most importantly of all, are you willing to not only find out what it is that you need to do and do it, but do it to help others as well? I mean, he took people with him when he left at the end of the series, and I think all along, in one form or another, he was helping someone out of one situation or another, along with himself. And I think it's just important that we realize that we can come out ahead in the prisons that we find ourselves in. It's just asking the right questions. We want information.
Very true. Thank you. Margaret?
Well, and I think the show points out that life is a constantly changing process. People change, and the situations in which they find themselves change. And so you don't just ask the question right now, but you keep your eyes open and your ears open, and you see what's going on, and you keep that capability to question always, so that you can challenge and change things that have to be changed.
Very good. Any more? One last comment?
I think we could almost call this a Johnny Appleseed show, because Johnny Appleseed took his seeds and he planted them. He didn't stick around to see if these things were going to grow. He trusted that in the right soil these seeds were going to grow, and then he moved on. And I think this is sort of what Patrick McGoohan was doing with this show, planting a few seeds and moving on.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
The mere fact that he made the final episode the way he did, not providing the answers that everybody was expecting, is proof of that. You came out of watching episode 17 and said, well, why did he do this? And why were they playing love, love, love while they're shooting everybody? And you came out asking more questions than you did, I think, from any other of the episodes. And I think that's great that he is planting the seeds. But once you start asking one question, more is going to follow. Hopefully the answers, as Leo McKern said. Isn't that what you said?
What flashed through my mind was a statement by an old friend of mine, Theodore Sturgeon, who just died recently, whose motto was, ask the next question. Never be satisfied with just an answer. Ask the next question. Well, if there are no other questions, I guess we can wrap this up for the night. I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight and sharing your opinions with us. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and for sharing your opinions through your letters and for sticking in there for 17 weeks through a very bizarre, allegorical, mystical series. I certainly hope that you've picked something up from this all, because I know we have. The last point I guess I'd like to make is that it's not really important what we've said here tonight. It's not really important what any of us said, especially me. What's important in watching this series is what you think about it and what you do with what you think about it. This is a great opportunity to learn what it's like to be an individual and how to deal with that individuality in society, something we rarely see on broadcast television, and something that deserves a place on public TV. So, thank you and good night. Until next time, we'll be seeing you.